What can we do to help prepare our clients for the changes that are going to occur in 2013? Specifically, our clients who have a lot of taxable income or a higher net worth, whose income taxes are going to start going up considerably. So we started reaching out to our friends at Nuveen, who we've used longer than any other municipal bond trading firm in the 18 years we've been in business, and we asked them to come out and speak. For some of you in the room, you might remember Eric, who is our chief speaker today. Eric has done 3 or 4 presentations for us over the years. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Paul. And thank all of you. I know there's other things you can do with your mornings, so I very much appreciate you coming out and hearing this presentation. While I'm talking, if anyone has a thought, a concern, a comment, just raise your hand. This is much better if it's a dialogue as opposed to a monologue, although I was intending on saving a little time at the end of the presentation for Q&A if anyone wants to wait till then. But don't hesitate to raise your hand as I'm talking. Paul mentioned I've been in Chicago the last 25 years. In fact, I've been in the municipal business for 30 years. And I often think that, or joke that, my friends for the first 25 years would call and say, how do you stay awake during the day? Because it's the municipal bond market and it's not exactly exciting. In fact, maybe it's a little boring. And after a couple hours at work, everyone's probably nodding off because there's just nothing happening. Well, that was for the first 25 years. For the last 5 years, those friends want to know if I can get any sleep at night. Because so much has changed in the market. There's so many headlines. Quite frankly, there's a lot of misinformation. And some of that is what I want to cover and clarify today. I'm going to be looking at my notes from time to time because we do have a fair bit of information, as Paul mentioned. I want to give you a sense of what's going on in the municipal market today, what happened last year, what's going on today as we prepare for 2013. So an update and an outlook for the bond market. We absolutely have to talk about what was termed the fiscal cliff, or I'll just say what the heck is going on in Washington. And that's a very important conversation. I think it's also important to touch a little bit on credit quality in the municipal market. So much has been written about the municipal market and the perceived decline in credit quality. I want to give you our view of that. And I also think it'd be important to talk about interest rates, or in particular rising interest rates, and how people should think about an environment of potentially rising rates and how that impacts portfolios. So, and I know that we manage money for some of you in the room, and I want to thank you for that. But sometimes, the last couple of years, my presentations have started by clients thanking us. Last year, we did about 5-ish% for the intermediate high-quality portfolios. If you tax adjust that, that gets even higher. It's not as good as the almost 11% we did last year, and I think the 7 the year before, the 4 the year before that. But performance in the market has been good again. And I say again because at least for the 30 years that I've been in the business, many people are afraid to buy bonds because they think rates are going up and they're going to wait. And I've heard that for 30 years. And I heard it a year ago, a year before, and a year before that as well. Rates are going up, we can't buy bonds. And in fact, that hasn't happened. And again, the returns have been very, very strong. We have portfolios that have been on the shorter, more conservative side, about 3-ish%. Most of you in the room, about 5-ish%. Anyone who's invested in the inflation-protected municipal portfolio, about 10-ish%. We have some portfolios that are even 15 and 20% returns. So it also speaks to the fact that there's different parts of the municipal market, because when you hear in the paper, when you read the paper or hear on TV, sometimes they act like all municipal bonds are the same. So the municipal bond market is doing this or that, and everything's behaving the same way, but in fact there's very different parts of the market that behave differently, and we're going to cover some of that as well. Now, one of the reasons for the performance has been performance in the municipal bond market has been the performance in the treasury market. Now, I mention treasuries because we often compare municipals and treasuries, the two forms of high-quality fixed income. There's good corporations in this country, but since triple B munis default less than AAA corporates, triple B munis default less than AAA corporates. When you're talking about high quality, we think there's really only two forms. U.S. Treasuries and high-quality municipal bonds. There's been a pretty remarkable rally in the Treasury market, and when the Treasury market rallies or prices going up, the municipal market tends to follow that with a little bit of a lag and a little less volatility. And part of this has been the flight to quality that we've experienced lately. Now, something that I think is particularly interesting about this, and I think about it in terms of the counterintuitiveness of the bond market, that bonds don't behave the way many individuals expect them to. So I'm thinking not this past summer, but the summer before, I was in New York giving a presentation much like this. And this was around July, late June, July. And it was hotter in New York. We won't go there. So there was one individual who was particularly interested in talking about the bond market. And he got to the restaurant before we even arrived. He sat right where you're sitting, Mike. And before we were able to start, he said, I want to ask you a question. In fact, I want to make a statement. If the U.S. Treasury is downgraded or defaults, interest rates are going to skyrocket, and that's why I'm not buying bonds. So another version of interest rates are going up, so I can't buy bonds. Well, I said to this person, well, I could give you some reasons of why the exact opposite might occur if the U.S. Treasury is downgraded or defaults. The exact opposite might potentially occur. Counterintuitive. Well, on August 5th, what happened? Two very important things happened on August 5th. One, I had a birthday. Two, what was my birthday present? S&P downgraded the U.S. Treasury, and what did that precipitate? A massive rally in Treasuries. So the asset class that just got downgraded, and there's talk, we're going to talk about whether that can happen again. Fairly likely from the way it appears. But an asset class that just got downgraded, everybody started buying. What happens when there's fear and uncertainty introduced into the financial markets, people buy the safest, the largest, the most liquid, the most transparent market in the world, which is U.S. Treasury. So in spite of them just being downgraded, this gentleman who was sitting here, who quite frankly didn't listen to anything I had to say, I could tell by the look on his face, because my initial comment, well, if the Treasury is downgraded, interest rates may not go up, they might actually go down. He thought made so little sense that he couldn't possibly listen to anything I said the rest of the day. And that's exactly what did happen, though, again. So bonds can behave very counterintuitively to what individuals expect. And I think what that really speaks to is that individuals strongly, I would say, believe and understand that they need help in the equity market. I would suggest that they also need help in the bond market. It just doesn't behave the way you think it's going to. And getting advice from Paul and folks at Wealthtrust can be very, very important for navigating this counterintuitive market and really providing yourself for a good future as you reach your goals and have the income that you need. Now, a few other things happen in the market that I think are important. One, from a supply and demand point of view, the supply of municipal bonds appeared to be going up dramatically. We had, although we had all-time record issuance in 2011, 433 billion, we had a huge drop-off to 295 billion last year. Almost over 100 billion lower in issuance. Now, the expectation this year was about, for 2012, was to get up around 390, 400 billion. So another 100 billion into the market. That looked like there was going to be a lot of supply coming. But when you dig a little deeper, and the actual number was 373 billion. When you dig a little deeper, and you always have to do that in the bond market, what you found was 62% of issuance was refunding deals or refinancing existing bonds. And when you dig a little deeper than that, you find out that it was not a refunding that calls calls out of portfolios municipal bonds in 5, 6, 7 years. It was what we call a current refunding, where an issuer goes out and sells $50 million worth of bonds on a Monday, takes that $50 million and calls the very next day $50 million worth of bonds in existing client portfolios. So call risk in the market is something that's very underappreciated, and many individuals last year found their 4.5%, 4.75%, 5%, 5.25%, 5.5% coupons that they were expecting to hold for 5 years, 10 years, sometimes 15 years, being called away from them, which represents also reinvestment risk in the market. But the fact that that supply was so heavily weighted towards these refunding deals meant that although supply was high, the actual size of the municipal market shrank last year like it did the year before. It's never happened before in history. The municipal bond market has shrunk in size 2 years in a row. And that was in the face of very strong demand. There's a few services that measure this demand, flows into municipal bond product. It was over 50 billion last year. According to one service, ISI, it was positive every single week until the middle of December, where we had 2 negative weeks. And that was related to what's happening in Washington, which we're going to talk about in a second. But the 2 negative weeks, still, we had very strong demand. Over 50 billion flowed into funds last year. And in fact, the first week of the year, we had the strongest demand for municipals that we've seen since 2009. So although there was concern going into the end of the year of what was going to happen in Washington, there was conversation about increasing taxes, which we felt was pretty much a certainty. There was also a conversation about changing the taxation of municipal bonds. There was one proposal in particular by the Obama administration to cap the benefit at 28%. Now, our comment to that was, and by the way, this year we're celebrating 100 years of municipal bonds being tax-free, right? They've been issued since over 100 years ago, but it was with the income tax in 1913 that municipal bonds got their tax exemption. So it's 100 years of tax-free income for individuals, a wonderful thing in our view. But there was conversation that that could change, that the taxation of municipals could change. There's always been, in the 30 years I've been in the business, and even earlier, there's always a conversation every couple of years that it's only these wealthy people that benefit from these bonds, and we have to somehow change this. And we have to tax them in some way, shape, or form. So always a conversation. Municipal bonds, as we say, sell off or get cheap. Price goes down. We buy them, and the price goes back up. That's exactly what happened at the end of last year. We saw the market, although very strong performance, and we finished very strong. In December, we started to tick down a little bit. The irony of that 28% proposal, the irony that it's a proposal from the current administration, is that if you think about it, if you raise the cost of municipal issuance, if you raise the cost of selling water and sewer bonds, transportation bonds, public power, if you raise that cost of issuance, it's in effect, if you think about it, it really results in a regressive tax. It's a regressive tax because when we pay our water and sewer bills in this country, we don't pay them based on income like we pay our income tax. The more money you make, the more tax, and not just more absolute dollars, but you pay a higher percentage. So it's called progressive. If you don't make so much money, you might pay 10%. If you make more money, you pay 25%. If you make a lot of money, you pay now 39.6%. So the taxation in this country is progressive. The Obama administration believes very strongly in progressive taxation, that the wealthy should pay more. And as of the last agreement, that's exactly what's happening. But the funny thing about this capping the municipal benefit at 28% is a regressive tax. And that will fall more strongly and harder on the less wealthy or the poor people in this country as you raise the cost of issuing bonds. So that was one of the reasons that we, although we're worried, well, we're bond people, right? If we were optimists, and thought everything was going to be great, and I'd be in the equity market. We had an analyst once come into our firm who was reviewing our portfolio managers and asked one, he said, "Chris, do you worry about it?" And Chris said, "Stop right there." And the answer is yes. And she said, "You got to give me a chance to ask the question." And he said, "But we're bond people. We're natural born worries. We're about everything. So whatever you're thinking about, you bet we worry about it." We did not think that there was a strong likelihood that the taxation of municipals would end. Some people think it should, or that it would be meaningfully adjusted. So what ended up happening was taxes went up, taxation stayed, that made bonds again more attractive, and we're seeing very strong demand, and we're seeing a lot of flows into the market, and we're seeing values lifting up again. Now the conversation's not over. We've got the debt limit coming up again. We're going to have another conversation when the debt limit in the summer of 2011 led to the downgrade by S&P of the U.S. Treasury, AA+. The rating agencies have been very clear. If there's not $4 trillion of savings, the U.S. government could be downgraded once again. It seems like there's a very reasonable likelihood that happens. A very reasonable likelihood. We're not seeing any proposals that address $4 trillion. And again, the rating agencies have been very, very clear about this. All Fitch, Moody's, and S&P all have the U.S. Treasury with a negative outlook, although Fitch and Moody's still have U.S. Treasuries at AAA. It was S&P who downgraded them in August 5th on my birthday in 2011. But it seems like there's a reasonable likelihood, and the rating agencies again are being very clear. Here's what we want to see. We want to stop this political argument. We want to get down and make some decisions. We want to see about $4 trillion in cuts. And that's just not part of the conversation in Washington right now, so stay tuned, but downgrade seems like it's in the cards. And we've written, by the way, a short white paper on this that we can share with you. Is it possible that the taxation of municipals changes going forward? It is possible. We think there's a significantly less likelihood now than there was in December. Part of that is because the conversation now is changing, or at least the Republicans are saying, we gave you the tax increases. We gave that to you. Now it's time to talk about the spending cuts. So never say never, especially in the way things are going today. But we think meaningful change in the taxation of municipals is less of a likelihood, and certainly less in December, and still not a very, very strong possibility. I think it's also important to talk a little bit about credit quality. Now, we have the largest research team of any municipal manager in the country by far. We have 23 individuals who spend all of their day, and even a portion of their night and weekends, looking at municipal credit and making assessment as to what Nuveen's view is, whether this is a good, strong bond. Now we know there's Moody's, S&P, and Fitch, and they rate, thousands of credits. We have never relied on the rating agencies. We have never relied on the insurance companies. We have always done our own work. When I originally joined Nuveen in 1987, I can tell you that I was laughed at. I would call my clients and they would say, "Why is Nuveen doing all this credit work? It doesn't make sense. It's a waste of time and effort." It's a high quality market. Most of the stuff is insured as AAA. About 60% of issuance that had been AAA insured. What's the point? And we said, well, if we're going to invest client money, we want to know ourselves that we feel secure that this is a good investment. And we want to do the work ourselves. Well, now people understand that. How many AAA insurance companies are there today? There are none. Every single one of them have lost their AAAs. Now, a couple have gone from AAA to non-rated and are going out of business. Some have gone to AAA to BBB and are struggling. 2, Warren Buffett's company, Berkshire Hathaway and Schwab, have gone into the AA category. They're on negative credit watch. They're still in business. Warren Buffett's not writing any insurance today, as short is. About 3% of the market is coming in short today versus 60%. So we weren't predicting this, just we always felt that we wanted to understand. Now, a question for you, audience participation. Paul mentioned that I really enjoy food and wine. And we talked about Pizza Bianca, which I am absolutely going to, even if Heidi and I have to wait in line for 3 hours. Last time in town, actually, when I suggested the restaurant, she said, "Oh, that sounds really good." I said, "It's close to the hotel. Go there for pizza. It's supposed to be the best in the country. I'd really like to go there." And I had read that there could be a 3 or 4 hour wait. So I said to Heidi is, once I got her interested in pizza, I said, by the way, there might be a bit of a wait. And she said, "Oh, come on, it's Tuesday at 8 o'clock. I'm not worried about that at all." I said, "Okay, let's go." 2 hour wait, but well worth it. So if anyone hasn't tried it, I highly recommend it. Well, while we were waiting for the pizza, one thing that made it pleasant is there's a house next door. You go and have a glass of wine, and we had a nice conversation, reviewed the day, and talked about the next day. But as Paul mentioned, as Heidi can attest, I enjoy a glass of wine, and occasionally two, with my meal. There was a wine book that came out a couple of years ago, and it said, "We know nothing about wine, absolutely nothing. Please buy our book of wine recommendations." That was my reaction. This sounds kind of crazy. I got on to, what's this all about? But here's their methodology. If one person, let's say Robert Parker, gives the wine 90 points, well, maybe Robert Parker just likes that wine. It's his personal taste. If Robert Parker and Wine Spectator give it 90 points or more, well, that's getting better. But what they said is, that's not even acceptable to us. We want 3 ratings of 90 points or more. Doesn't matter which ones, Decanter, Wine and Spirits, Wine Spectator, whatever. I read all these magazines. I love reading about wine. But we need 3 ratings of 90 points or more. If a wine gets 90 points or more by 3 different services, then we're going to say it's a good wine, and that's what this book is comprised of. Now, does that sound reasonable? I thought so. Yeah. And I picked it up. I looked through, and like, these are all good wines. I had a number of them, not all of them. I don't drink that much wine. But and it was reasonable, and the list of wines that they recommended were good. So what does this have to do with municipal bonds, right? If there was a municipal bond that was rated AAA by Moody's, and AAA by S&P, and AAA by Fitch, do you think that would be a good bond? Do you think that would be a bond that we would buy and put in portfolios? 3 AAAs. You would think. Now, of course, this story wouldn't make sense if that was the outcome, right? What I'm going to share with you is, and there's a number of them. They only allow me to talk about one. There's a community on the West Coast, in Oregon, Portland, Oregon, that's rated AAA by all 3 services. If you open up, however, their annual financials, I believe it's on page 113, you'll notice a very interesting number. The amount of money they've set aside for their future pension funds. Does anyone care to guess? Now, across the country, we've set aside about 74-75%. That number is being disputed, but most people accept the assumptions that get us to about 74% of the money that we need for the future has been set aside for today. Now, back about 10-ish years ago, a little more, we had about 100% set aside. With the Great Recession, the credit crisis, we're about 74-ish%. Anyone care to hazard a guess as to how much AAA credit, how much of the money that they need for their future liabilities have they set aside? Throw a number out.
50.
50. Anyone want to go a little lower? Okay. Does anyone want, put it this way. If that's the decimal point, does anyone want to guess what the numbers over here would be?
0.
So they set aside less than 1% of what they need for their future liabilities. And they're rated AAA by 3. And the reason that's the case is because the rating agencies, and I'm not, this is not criticism, this is just their methodology. They are backward looking, or they have been. They're beginning to change. They are backward looking. And to be fair, if you are backward looking, so you take all the communities and you look at last year number and the year before and the year before and the year before and the year before, and you look at the general fund balances and you look at population levels and all of the numbers depending on looking at water, sewer, number of connections, age of the system, money set aside in reserve funds, hospitals, number of beds, doctor groups, revenues, inpatient, outpatient balances, all the different things you look at and say, if you can do that very objectively if you're backward looking, right? You can look at all the communities and put them in spreadsheets and you can rank them. Now you have to make some assessment as to what's more important in the weightings, but it can be very objective. So the rating agencies can, I think, make a fair statement. They're very objective. They're backward looking, they're very objective. At Nuveen, that number is very meaningful to us. We don't think Portland, Oregon is going to default, but you got to wonder if they're going to maintain their AAA rating as this catches up with them. And as either they're raising taxes, they're cutting services, they're doing any number of things that make their financials look a little bit different. So for us, we are forward-looking, which is much more subjective, but we think that's the proper way to do analysis. And therefore, we find that more and more, and a couple of years ago I was defending the rating agencies, saying that they got all this CLO and CDS and all that stuff wrong. But they're pretty good on municipal bond ratings. What we're finding is we more and more diverge. So again, at Nuveen, with the largest research staff of any manager in the country, we do our own credit work, period. And there are AAA credits that we don't think deserve a place in client portfolios, especially when you see numbers like this for future pension fund liabilities, especially when you see this. And there's other reasons. There's various parts of financials that there's other AAA credits that we're not too fond of. But what I do want to say, though, is over the years, and this has been about 5 years, right, since sleeping at night has become a little tougher because of all the headlines and what's going on in the municipal market, there's been a lot of predictions. Meredith Whitney, if that name rings a bell, is maybe the most famous one, that municipals are going to start defaulting. There's all these problems. These communities are in trouble. And what we have said all along is we recognize the stress, but we do not see the default rates increasing in a meaningful way. We think that BBB munis will still default less than AAA corporates going into the future. The incidence of default is going to remain low, that the communities will pay their bills, will pay their bondholders. Now, there's always defaults in the municipal market. A small number, always. Last year, the year before, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. There will be defaults next year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now. Part of the reason we do so much research is to avoid the defaults, but I just want to be very clear, that is not the main risk in the market. We do not see defaults increasing. We came out immediately and said, Meredith Whitney is wrong and will be proven wrong. And even after she was proven wrong, people said, well, she was just wrong about her timing, that this is still, the impending crisis is still coming down the road. And we said, let's clarify this. We said she was wrong, that she will be wrong, and it's not a question of timing, it's a question of understanding the market and analysis. That this is, her prediction is never going to come true. There will not be hundreds of billions of defaults in the municipal market. So at this point, I can now say, remember when I said 5 years ago that I'd come back in 3 years and 5 years and say that we were right? Well, at this point I'm saying we were right for we were right for 5 years now. One thing that's very, very important to understand is what municipal bonds are sold for. And I'm not talking about 100% of municipal bonds, but the bonds that we buy in your portfolios, these are largely essential service. And in fact, here's a silly story for you. If you, where's the compliance guy? Because I know that he's, oh, okay. I'm going to keep an eye on him. I guarantee, that always makes them nervous, which is part of why I like doing it. His mom said I was a little contrary when I was a kid. I guarantee that if you watch television tonight, watch TV tonight, you'll see an ad for a cell phone company, right? T-Mobile, Verizon, the whole thing, and you can picture them now, right? And hear them, extra minutes, bigger phone, smaller phone, faster phone, friends and family, all the, you know, it's basically the pitch is leave that provider and come with us, right? Could anyone imagine the following ad on television? After the cell phone ad, how about this ad? Attention Scottsdale residents, we got great news. We're digging up the streets, we're putting in a new water and sewer system, and if you leave your old provider behind and come with us, the new guys, colder water, hotter water, cleaner water, operator standing by for 10% discount. Could anyone imagine that? I see a smile or two. When you think about it, that can't happen, right? Water and sewer is a legal monopoly. There's no competition. People pay their water and sewer bills because when you go like this, or my hotel last night where I went like that to get the water on and hot and cold and splashing hot water all over the place. When you go like this, if something doesn't come out, your life has changed for that. If you flip the switch and the lights go on, something is very, very wrong. So when you think of the kinds of bonds that we buy in your portfolio, water and sewer bonds, power production, transportation, school bonds, things that are absolutely essential to our way of life. Now there's issuance in the municipal market, and this is the stuff that does get into trouble. There's tobacco bonds, there's various project finance for nursing homes. There's a portion of the market that has substantially more risk in it. There's no question about that. And when there are problems, they tend to happen in those areas. When you think about the bulk of the market, and in particular what we buy for you, a high quality market, essential service revenues, things that are we absolutely need and pay for. And that's absolutely critical to credit support. So what we said was at the very top level, these people don't understand the fundamental need and use of municipal bonds.
So there was once a rule of thumb, I don't think it's true anymore, and it sounds like you're confirming it, that general obligation bonds were the safest bonds to buy. Would you say that's true or false?
I would say that we need to recognize a couple of things. When people say general obligation, there's an assumption that there's ad valorem taxes, or the community is pledged to raise taxes to any amount necessary to pay the bonds. But yet there are some communities and some states that have limited taxing authority. So what's a pledge to raise if you're at your limit? So that has to be understood. There's unlimited tax GOs in theory, and they're not unlimited depending on where they are and how they're issuing. There's limited tax GOs, which clearly state that they'll only go so far. Over time, if general obligation bonds yield like this, revenue bonds tend to yield a little bit more. This relationship changes. And the nitty-gritty of portfolio management, which is what we do, is to watch a number of things, coupons traded, call features, credits, the whole thing. But this relationship is also very important. And when there were when Harrisburg, in particular, in Jefferson County, and then in California, there's been recent Chapter 9 filings, that's municipal bankruptcy, for San Bernardino and Stockton, California. It's something that we might want to talk about relative to pension obligation. These relationships change because what people realize is that if you're literally, if there's a Chapter 9 file, there's a default, you could be standing as a GO bondholder, you could be standing right next to the person that has the coffee concession at the State House, who's also a general creditor. So when you look at revenue debt, which comprises a good portion, water materials is the example I use, a good portion of the portfolio is actually more revenue than GO. In our portfolios, when you look at revenue debt, typically, and we say typically because there's as many exceptions, twice as many exceptions as there are rules in the municipal market, the judge will assign the revenue stream to the bondholders. That's going on in Jefferson County. They're arguing, and now they're trying to raise revenue, and they're saying no. And so, what's the revenue stream if you can't raise revenue? So, it really is. It's case by case. It's bond by bond. It's indenture by indenture. It's reading the whole thing to really understand what are your safeguards. And one thing that I like is some of our analysts have been with us 20, 25, 30. And over 30 years. So you can track credits over time and get a sense of how they perform, and just understanding the metrics, because it really is one by one by one. It has to be done that way. Assumptions in the market, there's 89,476 different issuers. And when I say different, they are all, it's just very difficult to make assumptions. So that's a relationship that we trade on. When GEOs started trading at these kinds of yields, we started buying the good GEOs. And then when they went like that, we made some money. And when we were buying the good GEOs at these levels, we would sell them these bonds. And when these relationships changed, we again reversed the trade. So we think it's important. We know that many people, and we actually, we offer what they call a buy and hold strategy. We know that many people employ that, buy bonds and hold them until they mature. We think that trading offers some significant benefits. Both risk control, if you see credits, and although I said there's not going to be a lot of defaults in the municipal market, the risk that we see is downgrade. And that's a very meaningful risk because credit spreads are wide. You can see the price of a bond drop by 5, 8, 10, 15, 20 points. So downgrade risk is important, so you got to know those credits. But trading to also capture a little bit of gain. Heidi always laughs when I use my right arm. When I was born, my mom knew I was going to be a municipal guy because my right arm is shaped like a municipal yield curve. And you know, this is 0 years and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You know, out to 30 years. The curve literally is typically over time shaped like this. You get some steepness here, and then it flattens out. There's some interesting reasons for that, but that's kind of the shape of the curve. What Wealthtrust does is they invest here with us. We run portfolios in this part of the curve for them. Now think about that. If you have a 9-year bond, a year from now it's what? An 8-year bond, a 7-year bond, a 6-year bond. If the yield curve is shaped like this, and 1% yield, you know, 2%, 3%, right? Its yield's increasing. As a bond rolls down and moves to maturity, it moves to lower yields, and when yields go down, what happens to price? Price goes up. So you can actually see a graph, the price of a bond kind of goes like that. Here's where you buy it, here's maturity, and you'll see it gradually go up. What we like to do is sell the bond in here. In fact, what I will offer is if anybody has a portfolio of municipal bonds, I will offer a complimentary review. Our analysts will look at your portfolio and give you our thoughts and potentially recommendations, the things that you should be thinking about regarding the portfolio. And one thing that's interesting, what I always see in passive portfolios, bonds that were purchased at par, right? And they got maybe 2-3 years left to go. Now, what I say to people is, if you bought IBM at 100, right, and it was trading at 110, if I could tell you the exact day it was going to go back to 100, what would you do today? I only heard one answer. I'd sell it. Actually, I've heard two answers. I'd sell it, or that's a stupid question. I'd sell it. It's one of those two. when I look at municipal bond portfolios, I see bonds that were purchased at 100, or we call par, that are trading at 110, and sometimes 115 or 120. And guess what? I can tell you the exact day they're going back to par. It's maturity. So what are you going to do? It's a 3-year bond. By the way, that $110 price is associated with the yield to maturity of maybe 30 basis points. How much money do you want to invest at 30 basis points today? Probably not too much. If you hold that bond, you are invested at 30 basis points. That measures your prospective economic return from this day forward. So why not do what we would do? Sell that bond, capture that gain, go from yielding 30 basis points of return to maybe 130 or 230 basis points of return.
So I think I understand your math, but what I don't understand is why would anybody pay that price when that's the yield to maturity on that bond? Why would somebody pay 110?
What? Well, I can tell you why someone would pay 110 or why we would pay 110 for a longer bond. But the shorter bonds, there are people, and we actually run portfolios of short bonds for people, although we say to them, and again, counterintuitive, say to them, this is more of a conversation we would have with Paul and his team, and this is a conversation we've had for many, many years now. Probably better off being a little further out the curve, a little longer duration, a little more maturity, pick up some income. This is what we call roll down the curve, this is spread tightening. You get some principal appreciation. But there are many, many people who are conservative. We used to have an ad at Nuveen, a drawing, a pencil drawing of a person with a belt and suspenders. Right? You really need both? Some people do. So there are extraordinarily conservative investors that don't want anything beyond 3 years. In spite of the conversation we can have that sort of shows and demonstrates that there's good reasons to be out to the 10-year part of the curve, 10-year maturities. So there are people that just desire that safety.
And they'll take a negative return to get it.
Well, you don't get a negative return in the muni market. You might get a negative real return because of where inflation is. They're not worried about it. Well, see, again, this is why I say individuals really need to talk to advisors. They will accept this extraordinarily low yield, which results in a negative real return out of personal preference, or either personal preference, which I understand, or I don't want to say, or maybe a not a full understanding of the bond market and its potential, given the shape of the curve, given the way callable bonds trade versus non-callable, revenue bonds trade versus GO, 4% coupons trade versus 3% coupons, and how all of this changes every day over time, presenting opportunities for institutional managers. So, but sometimes, you know, it's just it's a preference. But if anyone had a municipal bond portfolio, or actually had a friend who had one, I'd be more than happy to do a review. You get a very nice output, about 15 pages or so. Get some nice colored charts and graphs, but it really is a good education of what you own, how you're positioned for income, for risk, and I'll give you my thoughts on yield curve positioning, on call risk, on all of the metrics that we look at, if that's something that you'd want to take advantage of. I want to be a little careful about time.
Yeah, so probably we've got a few more minutes before Q&A.
Okay, so let me take a quick pause. Are there any other questions at this point?
You say the bond market has gone down. Is that in value or in units?
The bond market has gone up in value, down in yield. As yields go down, prices go up. which is the example when I was using my arm. As a bond moves towards maturity and prices to lower and lower yields, the price, and maybe, I apologize, I didn't give you a chance to see this. The price naturally goes up. Now this is affected by a lot of things. It might go up a little bit, it might go up a lot, but it naturally goes up as it prices to lower and lower yields. But then as it approaches maturity, the price starts to go right back down to par. So what we say is, if you can trade efficiently, you can capture gain in the municipal bond market and grow principal. And if you grow principal, you can grow income over time, and you can also negate the effects of inflation. So we think of total return strategy and active management strategy. Although we offer passive, we think an active strategy, historically is shown, produces a better return. So I might have been, maybe if you didn't see that, it wasn't clear, but the bond market has done extremely well as yields have come down, which means prices have gone up. So I think that's a good segue into a topic that I'll try to cover fairly quickly, which is rising interest rates. Again, 30 years I've been in the business, people say, I can't buy bonds, rates going up, right? Now I would used to challenge them and say, well, you know, my crystal ball is not that shiny, right? It's not that clear. You know, how do you really know this? Very difficult predicting interest rates. In fact, if you look at the Wall Street Journal survey since 1982, you want to take a guess. For the 51, 52 economists that they survey, and these are people that spend all their time thinking about the economy, what's going on in the U.S. economy, and how that's going to affect interest rates. In the last 30 years, what percent of the time do you think they got the direction at the end of the year our interest rates are going to be higher or lower? And the survey's going on right now. At the end of this year, they're being asked, will interest rates be higher or lower? What percent of the time do you think they got that question right?
50.
Less than 50.
Less than 50?
Less than 50.
Or
That's
in other
useful
words,
information.
About 30, I think it's 30%. It's either 30 or 32%. So actually, the person who sits there and says, forget about all this thinking and analysis, I'm going to take a nap, I'm going to wake up, I'm going to flip a coin, and I'm going to be, on average, more correct than my colleagues. It's pretty crazy. So we don't believe, but we believe it's very difficult to predict the direction of rates. Now, with rates having come down quite as far as they have, we also believe rates are going up. But the rest of the conversation is, well, do you really know? At this point, we feel pretty comfortable rates are going up. But then there's some more important questions. Which rate are you talking about? LIBOR behaves different than 10-year munis, which behaves differently than 30-year treasuries, which behaves differently than single A corporates. So, which rate? How far is it going to go up? If it goes up a little bit, that doesn't have much of an impact on portfolios. How fast is it going to go up? The speed of the increase is also very important. What's the shape of the yield curve going to be, or the relationship between 5-year bonds and 10-year bonds and 20-year bonds? Are 3-year bonds going to go up or down faster than 10-year bonds? That's very, very important. So what's the shape of the curve? Since rising rates tend to lead to subdued economic activity and falling rates, are you going to get the timing right? We've run bond portfolios. We have a composite, approved by all the regulators. It goes back to 1989, so was it 23 years? We had 23 coming on 24 years. We've had 2 negative years, okay? And I mention that because those 2 negative years, if anyone was sharp enough to miss our worst year ever, 1994, down 2.8%. Now sometimes when I say that, people say, oh, that's not so bad. Well, I agree. The other one was down 1%. But if someone was sharp enough to miss that negative 2.8% in their portfolio, if they didn't get back in the following year, they would have missed 14%. So in other words, you would have been better off down 2.8, calling me and yelling at me, and then staying in and earning the 14%, you're better off at the end of the day. So this whole thing of rising rates, which rate, how far, how fast, shape of the curve, all these things are very, very important. And in particular, and we also wrote a research piece on this as well, in 1994 and 1999, some parts of the bond market did have negative returns. Not all parts, some parts. And the papers like to point to those years. What we like to remind people of is that in 2004, 5, and 6, and we think that the near future, I don't think rates are going up for a little bit yet, the near future is going to look a lot more like the 04, 5, and 6 than 99 and 94 because the Fed is very, very different. The Fed is a Fed of transparency and gradualism. And in 2004, 5, and 6, when they took Fed funds from 1% to 5.25%, 17 consecutive rises from mid-04 to mid-06, guess what happened? If interest rates go up, which means bond prices go down, what happened to our returns in 2004, 5, and 6? They were positive. Why? One, we had the income component. But two, the market and institutional managers can adjust with the level of transparency that exists in the fixed income markets today. When the Fed has a meeting and then releases its minutes and then goes on TV for the show and then sends the governors out talking, there's really this very strong clarity. I remember 1994 coming into work. I was on the bond desk and it's like, the Fed did what? How much? Really? This morning? Oh my God, bonds are going to get killed. And they did. It's not the environment that we're in today. 2004, 5, and 6, Fed funds are 425 basis points. We produced a positive return in every single one of our portfolios because it was expected, it was gradual, total transparency, markets could adjust. We think the future looks a lot more like that than the way 99 looked, which produced a negative 1%. I'm not exactly proud of that, but I guess you could say it wasn't so bad. And by the way, that was followed in 2000 by up 10%. So again, timing, very, very important. So we do think rates are going up. I don't think that's going to happen for a while. That seems to indicate about 2 more years. So it's probably good to be a little further out the curve, earn a little more income, a little more valuable roll, a little more valuable spread tightening, terms that maybe we should explain a little bit more. But the very short portfolios, we'll run them for you. I'm not so sure that's going to produce the best return in the near term and certainly not in the long term. But much like when I was 20 years old, I had always had a big bond or component of my portfolio. And I knew better, right? 20 years old, take my $1,000, put in the equity market, I understand the markets, how it all works. It was here that led me to, I just couldn't personally take the risk. I didn't want to see my $1,000 be worth $700. That was not, I knew right here, that ain't gonna work. Now up here, oh, that's gonna come back, but, so, personal preference is very, very important when it comes to investing.
Eric, it seems like there's so much talk out there about cities that are going to go bankrupt.
Mm-hmm.
That there's so many of them. I've never heard that before, but now there seems to be so many of them that are, really bad shape.
Sure sells papers.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. We do not see thousands of cities or hundreds of cities or even 100 cities going bankrupt. It's also interesting that when there is a bankruptcy, it's not unusual for bondholders to get 100% of their money back. Okay? But there's definitely more stress on municipal budgets than there's ever been. It's also a fact that for 11 straight quarters, which is almost 3 years now, state revenues have increased for 11 straight quarters, increasing revenues. In fact, we are just hit a new peak in revenue at the state level. Okay, that's not something that's, you don't see that. We have it in one of our presentations. All the 4 years ago the revenues were down, but then the last almost 3 years now they're up. You don't see that on the front page of the USA Today, right? how many papers would this sell? Municipal bonds really doing okay. You know, probably not too many. There are definitely some communities under more stress. No question about that. The reason we employ 23 analysts, the next largest team I'm aware of, by the way, in the country is 14. And I'm pretty sure they have a portfolio manager who covers a sector, so they get to count one of each. 23 dedicated. 12 of our 17 PMs came out of research. We don't even count those in research capability. Spent 10 years in research and go to portfolio manager. That doesn't count as an analyst. That's 23 people who are just every day doing that. There's no substitute, in spite of the belief that essentiality service is important. There's still no substitute for digging into each indenture and looking at each issuer and making an assessment, which in some cases can be fairly different than the rating agencies who assign the AAAs and AA's the same way. There's BBB bonds that we love. It's AAA bonds that we won't buy. It's no substitute. So there's stress out there.